so that was really interesting what you told us about how molecular phylogenetics can actually help differentiate between two similar looking species. So I have a small question regarding that. Are the species labeled as cryptic after they have been analyzed by molecular phylogenetics, or what is the method that is used?
So there could be a wide-ranging species, right? Like a species that's distributed, let's say, from Uttarakhand to Kanyakumari, and it's all thought to be one single species, right? So typically, what would happen is a herpetologist or like a systematist would hypothesize that, hey, how can it be the same species all the way from Uttarakhand to Kanyakumari? Right?
Okay.
There have to be some breaks somewhere, and so this systematist would hypothesize that the species could actually be a species complex or a cryptic species. So let's go investigate, right? And when he investigates and he finds out that, okay, this is not one species, but it's 7 or 8 species, right? He comes up with enough evidence to say that these are actually 7 or 8 species. Then it becomes a species complex or a cryptic species, right? Basically a cryptic group. So once you break up a cryptic species into multiple species, it's no longer a cryptic species.
Yeah.
So
There's nothing cryptic about it anymore.
You just broken them up into smaller, manageable units.
Yeah.
Okay.
Classification. So.
Right. So you mentioned earlier that for you as a programmer and a data analyst, it was all about bits and bytes. And then moving on to herpetology, you realize that evolution and biology in general is more about a continuum. So this was a paradigm shift, as you said. Now, the amalgamation of these two fields, which is computational evolution, and I think you have enough experience in this field as well. So could you break that down for our audience and tell them how computational evolution works, basically how these two fields come together and contribute to further research in the field?
Right. So that's a very interesting field of science, computational evolution, where
Right.
you're trying to basically understand how do you model something that looks so random, right? Something like evolution. How do you make a mathematical model out of that? Right. So evolution to us looks very stochastic, right? We have these random assemblage or assortment of organisms that are all doing their own thing, so how do you actually make sense of it? How do you mathematize this whole thing? And once you can mathematize it, you can actually build models that can answer a lot of questions for you, evolutionary questions for you, and you can also make a lot of predictions for the future and so on. So, for instance, you guys must have heard of evolutionary trees, right? Or phylogenies. They're also called phylogenies, right? So phylogenies have been built for centuries. Last 200 years, people have been building phylogenies. However, before people figured out that you can actually sequence genetic data, you can understand genetic data and all that, phylogenies were built using morphological data, right? If two organisms have, the same number of scales in a certain region, then they're probably related to each other. If two organisms have similar number of spines on the back, they're probably related to each other, so on and so forth. So phylogenies were built based on such morphological clues that systematists back then got. And along came this whole revolution of sequencing molecular data, right? Getting out molecular data in terms of these 4 nucleotides that exist, right? So it all became sequences of every organism started getting represented as a sequence of nucleotides, right? A, T, G, and C. And so once that happened, I really think that's when biology got digitized, right? Until then, biology was really analog, like using a film camera, right? But once genetics came into the picture, you realize there were these 4 states There can't be anything else. There's either A, T, G, or C, and each organism is made. The genetic composition of or genetic fragments of each of these organisms is made up of combinations or permutations and combinations of A, T, G, and C, right? And that's when biology started getting mathematized, right? You could actually absolutely digitize biology. You could build a whole horde of algorithms to understand things and so on and so forth. You could, build evolutionary relationship trees based on this sequence of ATGC sequences, right? That each organism possesses, and each organism possesses a unique permutation of ATG and C in its sequence. So that's what makes this interesting. So computational evolution pretty much does this, right? It tries to figure out how do you make evolutionary, how do you build evolutionary hypotheses based on, based on molecular data, and what algorithms should drive these, right? So, yeah. So even back in the day, 200 years ago, people figured out that the representation of evolution itself should be in a form of a tree, right?
Yeah.
A tree essentially indicates a hierarchical structure, right?
Yeah.
Where you have a parent, and the parent has two descendants, right? Let's say A and B. Parent is like given birth to A and B, right? And A will again birth A1 and A2, and B will again birth B1 and B2. So there is a hierarchy here, where A1, A2, B1, and B2 can be traced all the way back to the oldest ancestor, the parent, right? And because this is a hierarchical, people intuitively started using trees to represent evolution.
Yeah.
Right? And that's why even today we have phylogenetics, we have phylogenies, which are evolutionary trees, right? So if you look at what a tree really is, it's basically a specialized graph, right? If you guys have done any level of graph theory in school or college, so graph theory is this fabulous branch of mathematics. So a graph is basically like a network of nodes or points, right? And these points are connected by lines called edges, right?
Yeah.
So any network of points that are connected by edges is called a graph, right?
Correct.
And a special case of a graph is a tree, right? Where there are no cycles in the graph, right? There's no circularity.
Yeah.
For instance, if I'm sure you'll be able to understand this intuitively even without a diagram. So if A is connected to B, right, and B is connected to C, and C is connected back to A, there is a circle there. There's a cycle.
Yeah.
Right? A tree is a specialized form of a graph where there are no cycles.
Just continuously connected to each other, but doesn't go back.
Yeah. So there are no cycles. So an evolutionary tree is essentially an acyclic graph, right? It's a directed acyclic graph. We call them DAGs, right? They are acyclic. Why? Because the descendant of, let's say, B is the descendant of A, right? This statement implies that B cannot be the ancestor of A.
Yeah. Of course.
Or to explain it further, if A has given birth to B, B has given birth to C, C cannot be the ancestor of A.
Correct.
Right? If C becomes the ancestor of A, you have a cycle there, and evolution does not work that way.
Exactly.
So it was very convenient for people to use acyclic graphs, also called trees, to represent evolutionary relationships and evolutionary history of various organisms. And why is this a directed acyclic graph? Because evolution happens along one direction, right?
Yeah, it
goes from, it happens along time.
Correct.
Right? So a lineage 20 million years ago is definitely less evolved than a lineage, the same lineage today. So there is a direction in which evolution is happening. So even if you look at a phylogeny, evolution happens from left to right.
Yeah.
Right.
So people started using directed acyclic graphs to represent evolution and represent evolutionary relationships, and so on. Now, computational evolution basically figures out how to build these evolutionary trees, right? So you have to build a directed acyclic graph out of all the molecular data you have, or maybe other kinds of data, even morphological data. Right? How do you build this? What mechanisms what algorithms do you use? You can either build a tree from the root to the leaf nodes. The leaf nodes are the extant organisms today that are present today. So because we are scientists today, we can only sample organisms from today, right? Unless, of course, you get a fossil from a few million years ago and so on. But otherwise, we are only looking at organisms from today, unless you're not a paleontologist, right? So, okay, where was I at? So you can either build a tree from the root all the way down to the leaf nodes, which are modern day organisms, or you can start building a tree from the leaf nodes and reconstruct your way all the way back to the root, right? So there are two paradigms to tree building, and computational evolution basically does both and tells you the pitfalls of both paradigms of doing it. And stuff like that. So this is the kind of stuff I am very interested in, because all these involve algorithms and they involve a great deal of biology. And another important task, another important facet of trying to mathematize evolution is, so the basis of evolution is mutation. You guys know that. So when you see that genetic sequences of two organisms are not the same, that means there's some degree of mutation that's happened. Right? And that mutation or that change is the basis of all evolution. So hypothetically, let's say at a certain site, the nucleotide A has mutated to C. Okay, and at a certain other site, G has mutated to T. Hypothetically, right? Now, which of these two mutations is more important from an evolutionary perspective? Right? Is A to C, mutating from A to C more important, or G to T more important? Right? So to understand, there are different people who would come up with different theories for this, right? Depending on the kind of gene you've sequenced, and what proteins do these genes put for, and so on. So computational evolution also comes up. Sorry, did anyone say something?
What proteins are expressed? No. I was just saying that it depends on the kind of proteins expressed. Whether the mutation one mutation is more important than the other.
Exactly, right. So it could be a whole bunch of things, right? Does the mutation cause a change in the protein, right? So then it's a very important mutation, right? So how do you quantify all this? So computational evolution also allows you to build these models of sequence evolution. Right? It allows you to add various parameters to your model, saying that, okay, this mutation at this site is way more important than this mutation, if it ever happened. And then, stuff like that. So basically you can try and model how evolution works in the real world and make algorithms and try and get better and better and better at it. We can never model evolution exactly how it happens in nature, because if we are able to do that, then I don't think we'll ever get there. But we can get bloody close to that, right? We can get bloody close, and that's what computational evolution helps you do. And all modern phylogeneticists, biologists, everyone uses algorithms and computers these days, right? Nobody does these calculations by hand anymore.
By hand,
there's software. There's some very cool software for doing all this work. And they're very easy to use also. So you don't have to be computer literate to use these software. But you do need to understand the underlying algorithm. You need to understand the evolutionary processes that the algorithm is trying to model, right? That is something you need to understand, though you don't need to be very good with computers. So this is the kind of stuff that computational evolution does. And I think it's a fascinating world, because as we go, we keep discovering new things about the way evolution works. And there's always scope for writing new algorithms, improving existing algorithms, and things like that. And because I come from an algorithmic background, I find this quite fascinating.
Exactly. That brings me to my next question, actually. I mean, what sort of the software fluency that you have right now, how do you think that has helped you in this current scenario?
Okay, so my day job was trying to understand algorithms when I was in software, right?
Yeah.
And build algorithms and stuff like that. So understanding these algorithms that deal with phylogenetics came pretty naturally to me because that was my job and kind of work.
Yeah.
That said, I think computer programming is becoming very, very important in the field of evolutionary biology.
Right.
And taxonomy and systematics and all those things, right? For instance, I'm helping a colleague from US out currently with structuring a lot of data that's out there in websites and databases, right?
Yeah.
And I'm just writing some simple programs to help structure this data, help make it readable, because it's come from various different sources, and the formatting is all off. And so I'm just basically trying to do some simple programming to make it more structured, so these guys can go and write a book out of all this data, right? So programming is actually very, very crucial. It's a life skill, I would say. It's like how you can speak in English, or how you can count, or how you can fix a tap in your house. So programming is pretty much like that. It's become a life skill because everything we do is computer based right now, right? And programming is an essential skill. So
could you name some softwares which we, at least the three of us here, don't have any programming background as such, but something that we could
so I think,
still use to?
Yeah, I think Python is a great program. Python is a great programming language. I just started working with Python when I had to do this work for this American colleague of mine, just told you about. And I'd never used Python before. So during my days in IBM, we used to do assembly language programming. We used to program in languages like C and Java, some Java. We all hated Java, but yeah, we had to program in Java. But Python is really cool. If you want to start off as a programmer, you want to, if you want to understand the power of programming, the power of being able to manipulate large amounts of data, Python is it's really flexible and useful, and I think you guys should start off with Python. Python is damn cool, and then you can move on.
Yeah, there's one more software I've heard of as MATLAB. What entails that? MATLAB.
MATLAB is actually like a composite of multiple things. It's not just a programming language, right? Okay. You can do a lot of stuff. I've never used MATLAB in my life, but I think you can do a whole bunch of stuff with MATLAB, not just programming. And it's not a programming language, basically. So if you want to learn a programming language, Python is my recommended go-to thing. But MATLAB and things, it'll always be useful to learn something like MATLAB or R, something like that. But the deal is, once you understand the mechanics of programming, right? All the other things will just fall in place. They'll just become very easy for you. Things like MATLAB and R and other things would just become second nature. So, programming is basically like the alphabet, right? You learn the alphabet, then you can string them into words and coin your own words and stuff like that.
So my next question to you would be, given the expertise that you carry from your previous field, and now going on to the chosen field right now, I'm sure that you might have a few changes that you would personally like to bring to the field of taxonomy from a perspective of a software engineer. Kind of detailing that question, I'd ask, so how can CS and AI contribute to taxonomical research? Like whatever that all the research that you're doing right now, and you're incorporating so many tools, and you're basically incorporating technology, which I'm sure a lot of researchers wouldn't have imagined a few decades ago, and you're now able to get all those new tools and get all those resources, and you are able to build something different from existing sources. What all changes you would personally like to make, or would like to see?
I really can't think of anything out of the top of my head, right? But that said, most, like all taxonomists, systematists, they all use computers. They all use algorithms to a great extent. Even if you're
Right.
working only with morphological data, people would like to do something like a PCA analysis, for example. All sorts of statistical analysis that you can do with morphological data. And all that is done using a computer. Right? And similarly, like when you're using molecular data for your taxonomy, then you use a whole bunch of tools that help you do phylogenetics. And yeah, but my only thing is, it's okay that you're a biologist, you've not been trained in computer science or algorithms and so on, but it's absolutely your job to understand what a certain software does, right? Or before using it and before publishing your results in a scientific paper, right? You need to understand what it does. So a lot of these software, for example, you just have to dump data into them, right? You just have to dump data in a certain format and click maybe 4 or 5 buttons, and lo and behold, you get an evolutionary tree out of it, right?
Yeah.
So it's that easy to use, but without understanding the underlying algorithm to build that tree, I think it's not a great idea to use the software if you don't know what it's doing. So that's something that I would like to see a lot of taxonomists and systematists do a little more proactively. Try and understand the software and the underlying algorithm before using it to publish your results, right? Because sometimes I have seen like some papers where they've just published. They wanted to, they published the results, but the methods they've used are completely counterintuitive to what they wanted to do. They got the results they wanted in the end. They could say that, okay, this is a distinct species of lizard, or this is a distinct species of snake. Yes, you got your results, but the methods you've used are wrong because the underlying algorithm
wasn't made for that.
Should not be used for these purposes.
Right.
Stuff like that. So that's something I would like everyone to understand before using software. It's a double-edged sword. It gives you a lot of freedom and flexibility and ease of use, computer software. At the same time, it can be very dangerous. It can be a very dangerous thing to use, right? Because anybody can basically do this kind of analysis using a software. And if you don't know what you're doing, could be terribly wrong.
Makes sense.
That's true.
So you need to know both the sides of the coin, basically. Like if you
not in depth at least, but at least on a broad scale what this algorithm does. And you should very importantly know what the pitfalls of a certain software are.
Yeah.
No software is perfect, right? All software is written by people like me, and people like me are prone to making a lot of mistakes. So you need to understand pitfalls of a certain software. And when you're publishing your research, you need to discuss those pitfalls and how you have mitigated those pitfalls. Then you get a holistic, you kind of get more comfortable and confident with that work, with that paper. Okay, this guy has really understood the software. He's understood, he or she has understood the pitfalls and has mitigated it well. Right? As opposed to just clicking 4 buttons, getting a tree and saying, hey, look, here's the tree. And here are the 2 species that we're talking about, right? So yeah, so that's something that I'd like to see change over the next maybe few years.
Yeah. And maybe I think to start with, probably kids my age, slightly younger even, if they were, given a more holistic approach, say for example, if we were to start off our degree with everything in it, not just biology, but say a bit of maths, a bit of chemistry and a bit of physics in it, that probably could be a good start for researchers in making. It could push them to get a better interdisciplinary approach. And maybe if we were to start younger, then we'll get a better understanding of the algorithm or how the mechanism or how the whole thing works, essentially.
Yeah, absolutely. I couldn't agree with you more there. Like another problem is how we as society and as whatever, if you're students or whatever, another thing we all tend to do is we tend to compartmentalize ourselves, right? We tend to say, okay, I'm a biologist.
Exactly.
Yeah.
It's not my job to understand mathematics, right? It's not my job to understand physics. So I will live in this little compartment of biology and try to do great science, right? That's not how it works, right? And so if you're a biologist and you want to use some of these algorithms, you want to use computers to make your research better, it's your job to understand what you do. You just can't say, I'm a biologist, I don't understand software, I don't understand statistics, I don't understand graph theory. You have to understand these things if you want to use them in your research.
Correct. Right. Correct.
So true.
I think that will probably, obviously there has to be a part of the students where they have to actively do this, seek out, opportunities, or probably go and read more about, say, if I'm a biology student, then I should proactively go and read a little bit, go out of the box and reach out to different people who are from different disciplines, kind of get to know what they're doing, read a little bit more. Probably that will help me, build this entire holistic approach where further, when I actually go and try to figure out something on my own, I won't feel that I don't have the resources to do it, or I don't have enough knowledge to do it.
Yes,
Yeah.
yes.
Plus, when you get a chance to apply this sort of knowledge, instead of just reading it through books or classes or online courses, when you actually do work with that software, then I think that would help students or anybody who is interested in that topic to learn it in a better way.
Yep.
We'll be doing it live. We'll be seeing how it actually impacts the world. I think that's really how things.
Now, see, for example, it's very straightforward. Like, let's say you're trying to answer a certain question in biology itself, right? And you've collected all this data, and you realize that the only way I can answer this question the only way you can answer this question is if you run a principal component analysis. Or let's say if you run a linear discriminant analysis, some kind of Fundu statistic stuff. Now it's your job to go and find out what kind of mathematics is involved in this kind of stuff.
Right?
What does a principal component analysis entail? What does it tell you? And what does it not tell you? Right? And how is it done? Right? Try and understand that really well before you use software tools to just run something like a principal component analysis and come up with these beautiful charts and graphs.
Right.
The same thing applies with phylogenetics as well. Right? Try and understand what you're trying to model by building a tree. Right? And what algorithm is this tree building software using? Is it using a concatenated approach? Is it basically building a tree from root to leaf? Or is it using a coalescent approach, which is building a tree from leaf back to root? Right? So these are some of the things that people have to bear in mind before doing research. At least this is what I feel.
No, that makes sense, especially at this stage of our degree. We can relate to this because I think we are kind of at this kind of, we are transitioning from a bunch of students who set out to get a degree in just biology to kind of transitioning into students who are trying to inculcate a better or imbibe into ourselves a better interdisciplinary approach, and not just getting the basics out of it, but actually understanding how a certain subject or how a certain X substance works. So this makes sense. It makes complete sense to us. I'm sure even Anukya and Lumina can relate with this.
Yes, definitely.
Yeah.
So they're all interrelated: chemistry, physics, mathematics, and biology. Right?
And computer.
Computer science is basically a means to achieve an end, right? But the fundamentals, like if you look at pure sciences, these pure sciences are related. Without understanding chemistry, you can't understand genetics, for example, without knowing chemistry.